Hello there. Hi. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to another episode of the My English Matters podcast. I'm Amnah from My English Matters, where we help Malaysians and English language learners, improve their English through our online courses and workshops. So, if you're watching me, say hello in the comments. I like to see your comments. Today's topic is all about concluding sentences. So, let me just show the topic here. Concluding sentences, tips and phrases for ending responses effectively. Now, I wanted to just record this with a script, but I thought, why not go live? Because I really like the energy that I get from you guys when I go live. Right. So let me just pull up the comments here. Okay, so I can see a few people watching. Say hello to me in the comments. Tell me where you are watching from. I love to get the energy from you guys. Now, before we begin this topic, I want to invite you to our free masterclass. It's a training about grammar and vocabulary. It's called Grammar and Vocabulary, a quiz-based masterclass for fluent English. You can go to myenglishmatters.com/masterclass to sign up and register for that training. Or you can just DM us, you can just post a comment, post class, and then we will send you a link via DM. Hello, Faisal, I can see you. All right, let me show there. Right. Okay. So the topic today is called Concluding Sentences, Tips and Phrases for Ending Responses Effectively. Now, I got the idea for this topic because we had a one-to-one session with one of our students last week. We rarely do one-to-one sessions, but we do them for special occasions, for special bonuses for our students. And the question that she asked was, how do I end a response? So when she has she said that she has these monthly presentations with board of directors, and she would present for a few minutes. And after her presentation, she would get questions from members of the meeting. So after giving an answer, she struggled with ending the response. So ending the answer to the question. So she asked us tips for how to respond effectively. So that's the topic today. It's concluding sentences, tips and phrases for ending responses effectively. Now, before I share these tips, let me know, how do you usually end your responses to a question? So imagine that you are in a meeting or in a presentation and somebody asks you a question and you are able to answer the question, but how do you end the answer? How do you actually conclude your answer? Do you just keep quiet? Do you summarize? So you might be a bit more advanced. You may summarize, or you may say, thank you. Or some people, they just go, so yeah, and they just end it like that. Okay, so those are possible ways that you could end your responses, which is, they're all fine, but I want to share a few more today to help you have a bit more phrases and keep these techniques to remember whenever you have to present or whenever you have to answer a question. All right. So I want to share with you the usual phrases that I share when I'm asked a question and then I have to answer. So usually I get questions during our sessions, like these sessions, Facebook Live sessions, or live videos, or I get I get questions in our Zoom sessions. Usually the questions are related to speaking and communicating. So I would always give advice or tips. So when I give my advice or my tips while I'm answering the question, these are the phrases that I usually use that you can also use as well to end my answers. I would say, I hope that's helpful. Or I would say, that's how I would, for example. That's how I would end a presentation, for example. Or I would ask them, is that helpful? Another one is, does that answer your question? You can also say, so that's my answer to your question. Or I could say, is that clear for you? I hope so. Right? So I would say, is that clear for you? I hope so. Sometimes I would just say, is that clear for you? And then if they would say yes, or if they say no, then I would elaborate even further. But if it's a very short answer and I'm not expecting them to answer and to ask anything else, I would say, I hope it was clear for you. All right. So I hope that's helpful. I can see a few people watching, but I don't see your comments. Say hello in the comments. Tell me where you are watching from. We're live today. It's Friday. It's 9:36 a.m. in the morning here in Malaysia. Okay. Now I'm going to share with you 5 tips for ending responses effectively. Okay, so 5 tips. I don't have slides with me. It's just a script today. Well, not really a script. I have my points in my notebook. All right. So number 1 is to use polite language. Now, this is something that everybody knows that we have to be polite, right? In most situations, it's good to be polite, especially when we want to be professional. So use polite language. But there are certain circumstances and situations where we can get a little bit aggressive, or we might be a bit emotional, especially if we're talking about a topic that is sensitive to us or something that is close to us. And we may get a bit fiery and forget to be polite. So if you are in a situation where the environment is a bit hostile, it's good to use polite language just to show respect. And also, when you use polite language, let me just look at my notes here. When you use polite language, it fosters a positive atmosphere for further interaction. So you don't want to push people away, or you don't want to sort of punish people for asking a question, right? So one, you could express gratitude by saying, thank you for your question. You could say, I appreciate the question, right? And you could say, after you give a passionate or a fiery, or maybe even an aggressive response, you could say, as you can see, I'm very passionate about this topic. So thank you for the question. So you still remain polite and courteous. And you could also just mention their name when you end your answers. You could say, Aisha, thank you for asking that question. I love that question. Or you could also say, thank you, Azari, for giving me the opportunity to answer that question. Okay, so just remember, use polite language to show respect and foster a positive atmosphere for further interaction. This is especially helpful when the topic is sensitive or something that can be a bit emotional for you. So always remember to use polite language. Right. My next tip, number 2, is to summarize. So if you give a very long answer, so somebody asks you a question and it requires a longer explanation, it's always good to summarize your answer. Now, what we teach our students is the PREP framework, which is point, reason, explanation, or example, and then back to the point. So that's one way you could summarize your answer. Another way is you could just use the point and reason. So, for example, somebody asks you a question and you give a lengthy answer, right? And then summarize by saying, in summary, or you could say, in conclusion, this is my point and this is my reason. So it's just PR. You don't have to go PREP. Or you could say, to sum up, this is my point, this is my reason. Another way you could summarize is by saying, to close the loop. Okay, so remember, if it's a long answer, it's good to summarize, because we've had students where they say that when they're presenting and somebody asks them a question, they tend to they give a really long explanation, but they fail to summarize. So when they fail to summarize, people are waiting for them to close that loop, and it just ends awkwardly, and they don't know whether that person has finished speaking or whether they want to say more. So remember to summarize for longer explanations. Now, my third tip is you could say, hold on. You could invite further discussion. Now, some people don't like to invite further discussion, right? Most people, when we're presenting, we don't want people to ask questions, right? So a lot of people just like to end it there. But there are certain situations where you do need to get that person to ask more questions or invite further discussion. Maybe you are presenting a proposal, or you have a pitch that you need to present to your clients. and you want them to ask questions because you want to get their buy-in, you want them to agree to something, right? So you can invite further discussion if it's needed. You could say, I have a few examples here. So I've covered the basics, but if you'd like to explore this topic further, I'm happy to dive deeper. You could also say, this is just the tip of the iceberg, but if you're interested, we can delve into more specifics. Or you could say, if you have any follow-up questions or need clarification on any point, please don't hesitate to ask. So those are just some phrases that you can use to invite further discussion. Or you could also ask them, is there anything else you need me to clarify? Or do you have any other questions? Or I'd love to talk more about this. Okay, so that's my third tip. All right, so number 4 is provide closure. This is similar to summarizing your answer, but sometimes when somebody asks you a question and your answers are very short, it's always good to give a closing sentence, like so that you provide closure and then you know that, and the person knows that you've ended your answer. So you could say, that's all I have to say about that, or that's all I can share for now. Another one is, that just about covers it. You can also say, that should cover everything. That's all from my side. That's the gist of it. Gist means the main or essential part of something. Or you could say, that concludes my explanation. So always provide closure, whether it's through a summary for longer answers or just a closing sentence. Which brings me to my last tip, which is number 5, allow other people to speak, right? So maybe you say your answer was really short, and then you say, that's all I have to say about that. And then silence, right? If that happens, don't try to fill in that awkward silence with talking even more, even though you've already ended. So when that happens and nobody's speaking, you could pass the mic or give the floor to someone else, right? By saying, you could refer to the chairperson of that meeting. You could say, Faisal, shall we continue? Or you could just say, mention the person speaking, right? The chairperson who is the speaker, sorry. You could just mention that, the chairperson, and say, shall we continue, Aisha? Or just say Siti. And then Siti will take over. Just mention that person's name. Or you could say, if you were in a Q&A session, you could just say, all right, next question, if it applies. Or if you have somebody waiting after you to present, you could say, I'll give the floor to Nazreen, for example, right? Who is the next presenter waiting. Or you can also ask another person in that group. You can say, Aisha, do you have anything you want to say? Or Aisha, is there anything else that I missed out? So maybe Aisha is on your team, and maybe they have something to share as well. Or you could also say, does anybody else have a question? Okay, so those are my 5 tips. I hope they're helpful for you. My 5 tips for ending responses effectively with some phrases. Okay, so let me just summarize. Number 1 is to use polite language. Remember to use polite language, even if it's especially helpful in hostile situations where the question can be a bit hostile, or the topic is something that is sensitive or close to your heart. Remember to use polite language, okay, by expressing gratitude or mentioning that person's name, or just addressing it by saying, I'm very passionate about this topic. Thank you for the question. Another way, number 2, is to summarize. So especially if you are giving long answers, try to use PREP, which is point, reason, example, point. Or if it's too long for you to do that, just give the point and the reason again, so that people remember what you actually said. Number 3 is to invite further discussion. So if it's necessary for you, if you feel that there is more for you to share, you can invite the person to discuss even more with you, whether it's during the meeting, or you can meet with them afterwards. And number 4 is to provide closure. So I always say, if it's a short answer, provide a concluding sentence. If it's a longer answer, you can summarize. But it's always good to close your answers. And my last tip, number 5, is if you want to avoid that silence after you end an answer, invite someone else to speak by mentioning that the chairperson's name, or asking someone else to chip in, or just give the mic to someone else, or to the next person that's going to be presenting. All right, so I hope that's helpful for you. Let me know in the comments. Hi Shakila, Selamat Hari Raya to Kelas Tuition Kak Long, Azhari, Faisal, thanks for joining me, and in the comments. I hope that was helpful for you. But before we go, remember, we have a free training next week. It's called Grammar and Vocabulary, a quiz-based masterclass for fluent English. It's a live class on Saturday, 4th May, 10 a.m. Go to myenglishmatters.com/masterclass to register, or comment class here in the comments, and we will DM you the link to register. It'll be a fun session with you all. We'll be teaching grammar and vocabulary to improve your grammar and expand your vocabulary for workplace situations. All right, I think that's all from me for today. I hope that's helpful. So, Assalamualaikum, and I'll see you in our next episode, inshallah. Bye for now.